In this video, I'm going to walk you through our beginner's range of kits inspired by Jabberwocky. I'm going to walk you through right from unboxing through to how to use all the materials in the kit and how to stitch. So first, when you receive your kit, you'll receive the following: a 5-inch embroidery hoop, lots of threads all on numbered bobbins, as you can see here, there's numbers written on each one, a piece of organic calico with the design printed on and a couple of embroidery needles in different sizes, a little booklet telling you the story of the Jabberwocky, and inside there you have a guide on how to use your hoop, as well as a stitching plan. Also in the booklet there are guides on how to do each stitch. Now, I recommend looking at the other videos we've got on the how-to section of the website, with videos showing satin stitch, chain stitch, and how to split your threads, how to unpick, everything. So whilst the written instructions are useful, you'll want to look online. So you can see the main thing you're going to reference when stitching is the stitching plan. And here you can see that there's numbers on the plan which correlate to the numbers on your bobbins. And in this video, I'll just guide you through one of the kits, but exactly the same principle applies in everything we do here to all different kits. Each one has a stitching plan which has colour codes at the bottoms which will match to your bobbins. So the first one we're going to stitch is this one. I'm just going to show Act 4. And exactly the same principles apply in this as everything else. It uses 2 stitches, a satin stitch and a chain stitch. On the plan, you've got on the front your satin stitch and on the back your chain stitch. So, to get started, regardless of which kit you're doing, you're first going to take your fabric and you're going to want to put the hoop on the fabric. We use a hoop to keep the fabric taut whilst you're stitching, so you avoid kind of puckering the fabric at all. So here you can see me putting the hoop in place. I'm working on a hard flat surface, which I just find the easiest way to put the hoop on smoothly. So what you'll do is you'll select the hoop on an area where you're going to start stitching. You can see I've got it nice and tense so the fabric is entirely flat within the hoop. And when you start stitching, I'd recommend starting from the satin stitch side of the plan. So you could start anywhere on this, you could pick any of the colours. What I'm doing is picking colour number 3 here, which is the dark pink there, and I'm going to start from that central leaf. But first let me just show you the other designs. So here is our Act 3, and here I'd probably start, if I was doing it, from the bright red border going around the edge. Again, I'd start with your satin stitch if you're a beginner, because that will get you easily into the swing of sewing. So again, I'd start there with the red on the outside. For Act 2, which is our Beware the Jabberwocky, see there's large areas of satin stitch here which are really satisfying to fill. Again, you've got your stitching plan which has your satin stitch on this side showing all the colours. And then on the reverse you've got just a few lines to do in chain stitch. So here I would probably start on the dark pink because it's quite a nice, satisfying, smooth area to start filling in. So then here, this is Act 5. This is our Vorpal sword going snicker-snack. And here you see we're going mainly in satin stitch and only 2 little lines of chain stitch at the top and bottom. You can see here our satin stitch plan, and again with our numbers colour coded, 7 numbers here. And on the back you can see the chain stitch and there's only just this dark purple line going across. So here is our Act 1. And you can see this is made up of lots of satin stitch and then chain stitch making up the stem. And so in your plan, again, you'll see that we've got all the colour coded for the satin stitch. And I'd start anywhere on this, on any of them, probably maybe start with that orange ball right at the top. And then you can see you're using 3 colours on the back that you're going to do in a chain stitch. And so then the final one is this Act 6. And this lovely one's made up of, again, satin stitch and chain stitch, with chain stitch doing all these long lines around the edge. I think on this one, I would start the satin stitch again on that, maybe the orange balls up on the side, and then I'd do the chain stitch towards the end. And that's just using 2 colours on the chain. So exactly the same principle we do in this video will apply to those ones, but now we're just going to focus on this Act 4. So I'm going to start here using this dark pink, and I'm going to start stitching there. I could pick anywhere, but for example, I'm going to pick bobbin number 3, and I'm going to start stitching with that one. So I found the relevant place on my printed fabric, and now I'm going to pick up the relevant thread. Now there's separate videos, as I say, on splitting the thread and doing your satin stitch and your chain stitch, which might be worth watching in detail, but I'll show you the key steps here. So I'm cutting a length of thread, probably about 50 centimetres long. And then when you're stitching, the thread itself is made up of 6 strands, but we don't want to use all 6, we'll use 4. And what I'm going to show you here is how to split out the thread, splitting out 2 strands. So you can see I'm pulling out 1 strand. Now here, I really recommend pulling 1 strand at a time. If you try pull 2 at once, you're likely to get a knot, and what might seem quicker will actually probably take more time in the long run. So with my 2 strands ends together, I'm going to fold over the thread. So you end up here, you can see I have got 4 strands together at that end and a loop at the other end. Now what I'm going to do is just thread the 4 strands through the eye of the needle. You've got 2 different sizes of needles, so do use the one which is easiest for you. We've included a couple, so you've got a few choices. So you can see I've got a loop at one end of the threads. And now when I'm stitching, I'm now going to start filling in this. And all you're wanting to do is fill that area of colour. You can do it however you would like. So I generally recommend working across the shorter direction. So here I'm going to work horizontally rather than vertically. But if you filled it in vertically, so going top to bottom, that would look probably exactly the same at the end. But you can see here, I'm just going the shorter direction because I think it's easier to get a neater stitch. And here I'm doing my satin stitch, and I'm literally just going up in one end and out the other. So in a kind of almost circling round. So do watch the other video on this stitch just to make sure you really understand it if you want to see more detail. But all I'm going to show you is just a little bit here and show you how much I've got left when I cast off the thread. What I do is I'm just going in the back there. I'm just running the needle under the stitches that have been there, and that holds the thread in place. And I'm going to snip off any excess. So that's how the satin stitch plan would work. You'd work in exactly the same way, just picking a colour based on the stitch plan and filling in that area in that colour. So whilst I've got the dark pink, I could go and do all the dark pink leaves, or just move on to a different bit. It doesn't matter the order you do things in. Now one thing you'll notice is the hoop is obviously too small for the fabric. So you're going to need to move the hoop around as you stitch. And that's just really simple. Just keep moving it along and repositioning it. You will find that obviously you have to at times put the hoop over areas you've already stitched before. And so don't worry about that. Just when you put it on over areas that are already stitched, it won't ruin the stitches that are there, but just don't force it on too much. Just put it on loosely. There is a guide here that shows you everything you need to know about this. So, and one of the key points is when you're not stitching your piece, take the hoop off. If you leave the hoop on for too long, you might end up getting marks on the fabric. So on the reverse side of every stitching plan, there is then the chain stitch plan. And chain stitch is a slightly harder stitch, so I'd recommend coming to it at the end. Every single design has these long lines at the top and bottom that are done in chain stitch. And they're a really wonderful way for you to test out and learn the stitch. Make sure you know what you're doing, because all you have to do is follow a straight line. So I'm going to show you that here. And each design has this same straight stitch along it. So again, I'm cutting a similar 50cm length of thread. And again, I'm going to split out just 2 strands from that. Now, one thing I didn't mention before is in order to keep your threads organised, I really recommend taking the 4 strands that are left over and just winding them back onto the bobbin. You'll then use those strands for your next lot, because you'll then take another 2 out to do the next set of stitching. But it just means you keep your threads really organised. So from every single length of thread you cut, you'll end up being able to get 3 stitching lengths, because you're going to split out 2 strands each time. I hope that makes sense. So here I'm doing the same thing again, where I'm putting the 2 ends together and threading those through the needle. And then I'm doing the same way I've got left at the end, a loop at the other end. So what happens is, when I come here, I'm going to start doing a long straight line of the chain stitch. So I make a little short first starter stitch, and then I secure the thread in place by passing the needle through that loop at the back. That secures it. There are 2 separate videos on chain stitch showing you 2 methods, the link method and the loop method. I personally here am using the link method, and it's my preferred approach. I find it easier to keep it neater, but people have different preferences, and so do take a look at both videos, because you might find you prefer the loop method. So I'm just going to keep stitching along this line in the chain stitch. And then when I get towards the end, or around about, I'm aiming for about kind of 5 centimeters left of thread left on the needle. So you can see I'm about that level now. I'm going to pass through my last one, and then again I just secure the thread in the back. So I pass it under a few stitches in order to just secure it in place. And I cut away the excess. So on all the other designs, you only ever will use the chain stitch in a straight line. Now this design number 4 is just slightly more complicated, because it does have the chain stitch going around in these circles. And by all means, you could have a go at one of them, and if you find it looks a bit messy, just instead cut it out and fill it in satin stitch instead. I'm going to show you just here on this one design how to do this chain stitch in a round. So I'm doing exactly the same process as I've done before, where I'm splitting out 2 strands of thread, and then I'm going to, as before, just thread 2 through the needle and put the remaining 4 back on the bobbin until I use them later. So when I start stitching the chain stitch in a round, what I'm going to do is start from the centre of each circle first. So I make my little starter stitch first. Again, I'm just going to secure the thread in place by passing it at the back through the loop. But do watch the video to show you all that. And then I'm just going to start working my chain stitch going round in circles. So I'm doing the same thing where I pass it under the little stitch beforehand. So I make a new stitch a distance away and I pass the thread on the surface underneath the previous stitch. Now you will feel like it looks a bit messy to begin with. Don't worry about that, it will get much neater the more you do. So you can just see in close up here exactly what I'm doing. So that's the process you're going to use with your stitching. Really it is just a matter of taking those colour-coded plans and filling in the various areas of colour. Depending how much time you spend stitching, each design will maybe take you 5 to 10 hours to stitch up. And in the process you learn your chain stitch and your satin stitch. And these are the two key stitches that also make up our Fables range and two of the stitches used in the musicians. So these kits perfectly set you up to be able to go and have a go at those. As you can see, I've now mounted these finished pieces up. I've stretched them and mounted them. We sell in the shop all the various materials you need to mount them up, as well as these really perfect frames designed just for these pieces. The box frames sit perfectly with each design, and then you can paint them up in a variety of lovely colours, so you get a really wonderful little finished piece, which can either be hung on the wall, but also because of how deep the box frame is, it can sit flat on a shelf, standing up of its own accord. So I really hope you enjoy these kits and they introduce you to sewing as much as, and I hope you love it as much as I do. Enjoy!